Ben Shapiro says that marriage isn't about economics. It's just people making bad choices. But economics is the study of human action and the choices that people make. So, of course, it's about economics. And when millions of people are making bad choices or making the same choices or reacting to the same incentives, to the same pressures that different policies put on them, that's not always a moral failure on the people, or it's not always just a moral failure of individuals acting. So we're going to test Ben's arguments against the reality of how economics actually works. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, live here in the LCI Green Room. Well, good evening, everybody. I am Jacob Winograd. I'm the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast here at the Libertarian Christian Institute, part of our Christians for Liberty network. And we're live here in the green room, or if you're listening to the audio later, you're listening to a previous live stream. But I'm excited for tonight's conversation. First, wherever you're watching, if you're watching this live, please make sure you're subscribed and like this video. Share it out, please. That way more people can watch it. We are live here every Monday in the green room. The start time does vary. That just depends upon what me and the guests can work out. And it is, it's 99% of the time me, to be honest. But there is occasionally another LCI host here hosting the green room. But right now it's I guess it's the Pareto principle playing out. 80% of the LCI podcast hosts do, or sorry, no, I'm getting that backwards. 10% or 20% of the LCI podcast hosts are doing 80% or more of the live streams. So that's just the way it goes. We're going to be talking about economics a lot tonight, and I've been talking about economics a lot more lately because as much as I've always been a foreign policy guy, and I've always been a political theory junkie as well. Like I was just last a couple days ago, actually, just with Dan Sanchez from Fee and Liquid Zulu, and we were just deep into the weeds about talking about libertarian theory and the non-aggression principle and self-ownership and how we define libertarianism. And I'm always down to have that conversation, even though I know that for non-libertarians, it might sound like we're speaking Klingon. But economics is something that I've been revisiting more and more lately because I feel like so many on the right and the left and the center, those who are into politics and those who aren't into it, are, and people might know that expression, like, it's the economy, stupid. But even then, they're kind of just, they have a very, I think, uninformed, very shallow understanding of economics and how much a lot of what's going on and how people are reacting to things and just different trends in our country and in the world, and including culture, including, people, decisions that people make in their households about what they do as families are very much impacted by economic policy. And tonight I have a guest on who it's his first time in the green room, but he's been interviewed by me on my show and also by Alex on the Protestant Libertarian podcast. He is a professor. I think he has another position as well at Cornerstone University, and he's a fellow at the Mises Institute. And his name is Jeffrey Degner. I'm going to bring him up now. Jeff, thanks for being with us tonight. I hope I got your credentials mostly right off of memory. This time I'm not going off notes. I'm just winging it. But go ahead and just reintroduce yourself for our LCI audience in case they missed either of your previous two appearances on Alex's and my show. Oop, hold on. You are muted. Let me unmute you there. Good to go.
Got it. Good to be back with you, Jacob. I appreciate your work and really that episode with Dan and LZ the other day. Really great stuff. So I appreciate you hosting a little bit of a debate. So I think you did really well as a moderator. So not a lot of people are doing that well these days. So
I have a background in, I didn't go to college, but in high school, I was a big speech and debate guy. I was the captain of my debate team. So I love debate, like on any topic, politics, economics, or even silly things. Because there's the topics themselves, then there's the style of debate, moderating it. But so yeah, no, it was a lot of fun.
Well, yeah, I definitely appreciate your work. And My role here at Cornerstone University, we're in lovely Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I do serve as the Dean of the School of Business and Innovation, and I'm an assistant professor of economics. Been here since 2018, and it was around about that time I actually started my research topic on inflation in the family. And I think when I started that process, that I had a little bit of a more superficial understanding about the connection between economic life and family life. And I think that Shapiro is talking in a way that I might have when I was first introduced to this connection. Again, I think we got a chance here tonight to go a little more into the weeds and frankly, go to a little more nuance and get beyond the superficial sort of arguments that he's making. So I hope we can do that together here.
Yeah, of course. And I would encourage anyone, after you're done listening to this live stream, you can go and listen to Jeffrey's conversation with me and with Alex on our respective shows. And we do talk a lot about his book that you published, Inflation and the Family,
Mhm.
which is what's the full? It's Inflation and the Family: Monetary Policy's Impact on Household Life.
Mhm.
And we got into a lot of, I think, kind of the fundamentals
Mhm.
of sort of like how economics affects culture. But this will be a good opportunity to not only sort of riff off of Ben Shapiro and point out where he's
Mhm.
wrong, and maybe where he even gets some things
Mhm.
right, even if it's only, maybe partially correct.
Mhm.
But we'll be able to see how we can apply these economic fundamentals to talking about very real world issues. So
Yeah.
I'm
Great.
excited to get into that. This was an episode that aired. Let's see, when did this air? This was a clip from Shapiro's show back. Where's the date? I can't find the date on this
It
video.
was early last week, I
Yeah,
think.
5 days ago. So,
Okay.
November 12th, so we're not too far off.
Mhm.
This was when he got a lot of heat for not this video in particular, but one he released beforehand where he was kinda defending the, H-1B visa
Mhm.
program and defending Donald Trump's comments. And Donald Trump also came under a lot of heat for I think people, and listen, as a libertarian, I'm not gonna tell anyone they should have charitable interpretations of
Mhm.
what politicians say, but
Right.
people might have been going over like bending over backwards to give the most uncharitable interpretation of what Donald Trump
Mhm.
said when he was just like, "You don't have enough talent," and we're like, "Oh, Trump thinks that the Americans suck and that we don't have any talent."
Right, right.
It's just like, like, listen, what he says is usually bad enough. We don't need to add any more,
Fuel to the
embellishments.
fire. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But this is in the context of a lot of that sort of back and forth that's been
Mhm.
going on over the last couple weeks. And it sort of, to set it up, like, there's obviously the concerns that people have about immigration,
Mhm.
which touches on culture and economics. But then there's also this sort of idea that uh, people are reacting to economic pressures and saying that there's not enough jobs and the
Mhm.
jobs don't pay enough, and so we can't just, like, why are we giving high paying jobs away
Mhm.
to immigrants when they should go to American workers first and
Mhm.
foremost. And then Shapiro was not only defending Trump, but basically saying things like, well, if you don't make enough money and whatnot, and you use the system and you're blaming the system and economics
Mhm.
for your struggles in life or your, bad choice. Basically saying you just need to take personal responsibility.
Right.
And then the claim that he said that we'll get into in this video that I found especially troublesome, and why I wanted to have you
Mhm.
on, because we talked a lot about this when I had you on my show. He said that uh, that economics has nothing to do with declines in marriage and in birth rates, and I was just like,
That's a bold claim, Jacob. That is a
yes.
bold claim.
Yes. So that's kind of the
Oh,
framing here for the
right.
why we're responding to it. And
Mhm.
so I just wanted to make sure people gave people that kind of context, because we're jumping into, like, this is sort of like I don't know, several orders of operations into like a very complex moving
Yeah.
national dialogue
Mhm.
across different political aisles and whatnot.
That's
So
right. And I think one of the things, I'm sure we'll touch on this as we get going, but setting up this dichotomy that he does right off the bat, that it's if there's any kind of change, say in marriageable age or these marriage delays that we're seeing, he chalks it up explicitly and completely to personal choices, and systems have nothing to do with it. This kind of either or thinking really shows that there's a superficial understanding of what's happening, in that we live in a complex world where two things can be true at the same time. And this has been, I think, historically a real trope on the right, that every problem that we see, every social ill that occurs in society is simply and only and always about personal choices, and that's the end of the story. And that's simply, that. Of course, I'm not expecting Shapiro to adopt a biblical worldview on things, but as you read the Proverbs, when it looks at outcomes of life, it talks about both. It talks about poor personal choices, and it talks about systems that
Right.
entrap or enslave the less fortunate, the less powerful. And so
The
both things can be true. And
the
Shapiro just
yeah,
ignores this.
like the whole book of Amos is him going to Israel and saying
Mhm,
that, like, the way you're uh treating your poor and your workers
mhm,
and just the layman
mhm,
is not right. It's unjust, and he
mhm,
compared it to, like, like the poor get sold for the price of sandals, or something, I think, to that
mhm,
effect. And so
mhm,
uh yeah, absolutely, it's like
mhm,
economic systems can be I mean, any economic systems, political systems.
mhm.
We were having this conversation in a LCI group chat in relation to a chapter and an upcoming book that we're all writing, which is going to be
Okay,
I keep plugging this lately, Faith Seeking Freedom Edition 2. This is Edition
great.
1. Edition 2
Love
is
that.
coming out next year. And we were talking about, like, quotes we wanted to use from one of the chapter. And there was a
Mhm,
couple Harry Brown quotes we were considering about, like, how you can, even if you live in an unfree society, you can take steps to make yourself free. And I was like, sure, I agree with that.
mhm,
We don't want to, like, go so far down that road where we just kind of say that, like, if you're not free or if you're not well off,
mhm.
that, like, it's just your fault. I was like, listen, like, that'd be like going to, like, African slaves in, like, 1830 and be like, the real reason you're not free is just
Mhm.
because of your own, poor personal choices. It's like,
Yeah.
that maybe it's a bit of a reductio ad absurdum, but it's just to establish the point that, like,
Mhm,
there's the extreme of, we see when it clearly affects people's choices.
mhm.
We would all understand that in a true laissez-faire system, that
Yeah.
that would really be the case. If you have something in the middle, then clearly, like, it's gonna be not either or, it's gonna be
Mhm.
both and so
Yeah, and that both end approach, I think, I I always go to Job on this one. When Job is recounting to the Lord in sort of his self-defense about his personal righteousness, one of the things he says that demonstrates his righteous life is that he it's powerful language. He shattered the fangs of oppressors. Right, and you think of the fangs of a serpent, right? It's got two fangs, right? In the sense that there might be multiple causes here, but it is just and righteous for Job to, as Ephesians 5 says, to expose the deeds of darkness and have nothing to do with them, and to call them out. So God doesn't say that, oh, Job, forget it, that wasn't a righteous act. It's just a part of the conversation, and the Lord doesn't deny that as his people, as his servants, that part of what we will do is encourage people to good personal choices and shatter the fangs of oppressors. We're about both.
right, exactly, 100%. So, just we go back to the Exodus, right? Like, they needed freed from Egypt, and yet then once they're in the desert, God has to teach them to obey and make right choice, or at least tries to
Mhm,
teach them to obey and make right choices. So,
mhm.
all right, I'll go ahead and bring this up then, and more of what we're talking about will come out as we're reacting to Shapiro. I think I'm going to skip ahead a little bit past this coming up part. There we go. We'll go right to there. Uh, People in the audience, please just let us know that you can hear this. I'm sure Jeffrey and I will be able to, but just give us a thumbs up or something, just to let us know that this is coming through for you.
Create more affordability in the United States. You need the prices of things to go down. The way the prices of things go down is with more supply, right? It's very simple. Okay, this is why I find it fascinating that there is so much talk these days about H-1B visas. Okay, now, there are many problems with the H-1B visa program. You can make the claim, I think somewhat accurate, that the H-1B visa program is too broad. The H-1B visa program, about 65,000 are offered every year, enormous number of renewals of people who have been in under H-1B visas before. I asked our sponsors over at Comet to explain this. It's a project of...
I actually forgot that, most of the time when I'm playing videos here, I play them at 1.25 speed so that we get through more of it here. But
Sure.
I forgot this is Ben Shapiro, and he already speaks at like 1.75 speed. So I was like, well, that's faster than I thought it would be. So I'm gonna slow back down to 1. We don't need to do that. That's gonna torture our listeners already. Right away though, like right off the gate, he brought up this claim, which is one of those things that seems perhaps like, maybe true in a very rudimentary sense, but also like oversimplifying things, where he says like, just basically like, well, the way we make prices go down is to increase the supply of something. And like, sure, yeah, I get it. Supply and demand, that is part of the equation, but that's surely not all of it, right? And we can construct scenarios where you increase supply and price still goes up because of just other factors that are going on that you didn't account for.
Yeah, exactly right. So yes, and this is one of the things where a lot of folks who are maybe might call themselves sort of conservative, libertarian-ish folks kind of fall for a very plausible, simple argument from economics, and you say, well, yeah, technically that's correct in a sort of shorthand bumper sticker kind of fashion. Yes, it's true that all else equal, if you go ahead and increase the supply of anything, the price will tend to fall. But that's not the only part of the story. Our employment and labor markets are much more complex. And so if you look at a couple things that feed into our labor markets, like the educational system, this has an impact on the kind of labor supplies that we have in the United States. If you back it up and look at how government treats international college students, this too has an impact on what's going on with the labor markets. Not to mention some of the role that minimum wages and other labor market interventions have on the overall situation that have been introduced by government prior to our current situation. So anytime you look at an economic set of outcomes that you find to be unjust or unbalanced, if you will, we need to, as burgeoning economists, we need to take a few steps back and ask the question: how did we get here? How do we get to this spot? And Shapiro's not doing that here. So
yeah, and I think the risk that comes in to when you just have that simplified model is that you can easily fall into the Keynesian trap of like, well, if we can lower prices by making more of something, why don't we use the government to just print a bunch of money and subsidize production, right? And or like you brought up education, right? Like, well, let's just use the government to pump a bunch of money into colleges,
teach everybody to code,
loans. Right? Yeah, give more student loans out. Like, oh wait, we keep doing this, and the prices keep going up. Why is that? Right? So that's why you need. It's like one of those things. It's probably like I always like to compare economics to physics, and it's like, listen, there are things you're taught in like 8th grade science that are like, well, this is kind of a true principle in isolation, but like it's kind of like gravity, right? Like if you think gravity is always 9.8 meters per second squared, and then you go into the real world and start trying to calculate things just using that one equation, not accounting for drag and angle and air resistance and atmosphere. Like there's so many things that you'd have to calculate to actually be able to do real life applied physics. And sometimes people just use like, one rudimentary principle to then, try to do applied economics, and it just falls apart.
Well, and you're absolutely right about that. And that's one distinction about the social sciences versus the natural sciences. When it comes to human choices, human action, there are no constant variables. Because we have minds, right? We have the ability to decide, to choose, to prioritize, to evaluate, and evaluate differently today than we did yesterday. And we're going to evaluate differently tomorrow than we did today. And I'm living in Michigan, as I mentioned earlier, so things are starting to get a little chilly. And my choices around what kind of shoes I wear are going to be dictated by the weather and the kind of all those sorts of things, where I value these things very differently in the summer months. I mean, it's just a simple illustration of how there are none of those constant variables when we're looking at human action. And so, again, I think what we're seeing from Shapiro is a bit of, you might say, mechanistic thinking or deterministic thinking about what's happening in the economy when it comes to labor markets. And then eventually, of course, he's going to talk about housing and marriage and so forth. But there's more to come here.
Yes, we're just getting into it. All right, let's go back. We're going to do normal speed this time, folks. So I'm sorry if I caused any sort of brain damage there by playing Shapiro at faster speed.
Perplexity. H-1B visas are a U.S. immigration program that allows employers to hire foreign workers in specialty occupations that require at least a bachelor's degree or equivalent expertise. Around 85,000 new H-1B visas are issued annually. The total number, including renewals, exceeds 400,000 per year. That means somebody got an H-1B last year, and now they got it renewed for this year as well. So you're bringing in foreign workers, mainly in tech. Something like 50% of all H-1B visas are coming in the tech industry. They're people who are coming over to work in computer engineering or computer science or something. They're working for Intel, or they're working for Microsoft, or they're working for Google. This has become a point of contention on the right, not because of the usual reasons that the right is concerned about immigration, but for economic reasons. So there are lots of reasons to be concerned about legal immigration in the United States, not just illegal immigration, legal immigration. So, for example, if you are bringing in people who are low skilled, don't have jobs, are going to be dependent on welfare and be more of a net draw on the treasury than they are a benefit economically, that would be a reason not to let somebody into the country. Cultural differentiation, a massive reason not to let in certain people from certain countries. They might be qualified in computer science, but if they're coming here and they don't like American values, and they like terrorist groups, for example, we shouldn't let them in. And it's like basic common sense.
So I do want to stop it there, and this will be maybe a slight tangent, but it's all related. But because right there's parts of that like, I mean, there's so much there where I kind of could, if I'm being charitable, kind of agree, and there's a lot of parts there where I'm very troubled because it, like, so just to give him the low hanging fruit, like, yes, there's obviously people around the world that, just in my subjective evaluation and preferences, I'd go, yeah, I don't know if I'd want that person to be my next door neighbor if they come from a culture where, they think that women need to be, dressed in, hijabs and fully covered. If they think that, like, if they're pro-terrorism, if they are anti-free market, and yeah, there's places around the world where if if those people come here, there can absolutely be cultural clash, and there can be consequences about that are sort of negative externalities. On the other hand, I don't know, like there's always like these sort of like just assertions here, like, well, we don't want this person here, and if they do this, if we know they do this, it's like, well, how are you coming about with this knowledge? Is, I guess, the question I always want to stop people and ask them when it comes to this subject, because I feel like there's often two things going on when it comes to this immigration discussion, and people are so focused on the sort of like rhetorical level of like, there's negative externalities to migration, which I can acknowledge. But then when we ask, like, well, you want to keep the bad people out, who gets to define who the bad people are? How are they determining who the bad people are? Like, how much, like, what special powers and privileges are we giving to the state in order to do this? And there's a huge difference between, like, now if someone comes here, gets accused of a crime, and we find out that they don't, like, they're not native born, or that they're not citizens here, they don't have residency here, then maybe go ahead and deport them or something. Now, that might be on the table. But there's another thing when we're creating systems where we're not waiting for sort of like a jurisprudence to sort of say, like, someone's committed aggression and now we're acting. You're creating a proactive agent, arm of the government to go around and be like, getting in everyone's businesses, to be like, basically, show me your papers, prove you're allowed to be here, etc. So it's a lot of stuff where, and like, immigration is not the focus here, but that stuff, it's just hard for me with what's going on in the country right now to not kind of stop and be like, like, conservatives were rightly concerned in the COVID lockdowns when police were coming and, like, arresting parents for,
going to the playground
and stuff like
that. Yeah.
We're way past that now. I mean, we have people, just in their apartments, and we have ICE raids going on. And I'm someone who kind of like, I'm not even an open borders absolutist here.
Mhm.
I think it's complicated. But I feel like we went from it's complicated and nuanced, and there's good discussions to have around immigration policy while you have a state to just kind of like, whatever, we're just going to give the state this kind of unilateral power to just,
Mhm.
decide. And yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
anything you want to say to that?
Well, sure. I mean, as you know, I mean, this continues to be a hot topic among libertarians and anarcho-capitalists about this question of the freedom of human movement. But one of the things that I've thought of here as you were describing the situation was what Ludwig von Mises talks about with respect to marriage. And this actually connects to what we're going to talk about in a little bit. But Mises makes the argument that as the ethics of contract have come into play in Western civilization over time, that has made marriage a more sustainable and frankly pleasant environment for women. Okay, rather than what he described as the cultural force, where it's polygamy through wealth or other forms of domination, and women genuinely were treated as slaves. Okay, so he's talking about this ethic of contract and the power that has with respect to making marriage a more fruitful kind of institution. Now, whether we as Christians buy that entire argument and the setup for that, that's a separate issue. But when it comes to this immigration question, I think that contract and work culture can be a very powerful instrument for what conservatives are often concerned about, which is the question of assimilation, right? This is often what you hear. And so if
Yeah,
contract
absolutely.
and respect for property rights. And yes, you may come into our company, our property. You're not trespassing. You have a contract to work, whether you are coming from right. And I know this is debated, but what's the difference then between an employee coming from the state of Indiana to work in the state of Michigan? We're crossing a border. There's different tax rules, etc. But both parties understand contracts. They understand the obligations of work. They understand that we're not going to steal from the employer. The employer understands that they're going to pay in a timely and agreed upon fashion and rate. So this culture of contract is something that I think comes through a little bit in Hoppe's work. That if you can secure that work contract, you are invited, so to speak,
Right.
then you're okay. What are we
Right.
worried about?
Which is not to say then that the H-1B visa program is what Hoppe's proposing, because I think
Mhm.
it's not. It's this.
Yep.
There's a lot of, and I'm not even
'Cause
an
it's
expert on it,
selective.
but it's
Yeah.
very selective.
Right.
There's a lot of corruption in it. So like it's
Mhm.
not. There's ways to have a sort of work visa sponsorship invitee
Mhm.
immigration system that would actually be, and sometimes maybe the very uh what's the right word here for the very, I don't want to say like every word I'm thinking of just sounds like a pejorative, right? But like I don't know, the very dogmatic open borders libertarians will just be
Mhm.
like, anything less than full restricted on open borders is tyranny, and it's like, okay, I get it, but like, yeah, having a invitee system like
Mhm.
what Hoppe proposed
Yeah.
would be simultaneously addressing the concerns of
Mhm.
conservatives, as you said, which
Yeah.
would actually increase the rate at which immigrants assimilate and become peaceful actors in the
Yeah.
society. Because like no one here is saying that all cultures are equal and all people are
Mhm.
equal, and that those concerns don't exist. But then so you would increase assimilation, but then to the open borders type to say, hey, I think Hoppe's system would actually increase probably the amount of people coming and going, to be honest. So
Mhm.
and that's good.
Yeah. Anecdotally speaking, I won't name names here, but my wife and I used to live in extreme Southwest Michigan, and there's a large company there, a global company, and they had a lot of expats from other parts of the world coming in. And uh, what we witnessed there is that again, they come with contract in hand, ready to work, and eager to succeed in the work culture first, which is really a reflection of the broader community. And so in this way, work can be that avenue, that avenue towards assimilation. I know it's a word that people on the left really dislike, but if we're going to maintain a cohesive society, which is a concern of the conservative side of things, then work enculturation, I think, is awfully important. And it's interesting, I think, how often in the Old Testament especially, but also in the New Testament, as Christians, we see the word trespass being used a lot to describe sin as a category. And so the opposite of that, right? Coming with permission and so forth, is really an honorable way to go about interacting with people from all different parts.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we're going to talk about, deciding who can and who can and who can't come here, I would have more objection to someone from, Los Angeles moving into my neighborhood than someone from Mexico probably moving into my neighborhood. So it's like, if we're gonna have that fight, then we're gonna have maybe different standards. So anyway, we'll bring Shapiro back up here.
All right.
And if you ever want to stop it, Jeff, just like raise your hand and I'll see it.
Oh, okay. Sounds good.
You can make the case that there are a lot of people who are being let in who are actively Chinese agents, infiltrators at our tech companies who are stealing IP. That would be an amazing reason not to let somebody in. However, the case that's being made right now against H-1B visas is that H-1B visas are bad economically speaking in general for the American population. Now, in order to make that case, you have to make the case that they are artificially driving down the price of labor, which we can argue about in a second, and that there are no externalities that are beneficial to bringing them in, that the country is better off banning them and using quote unquote domestically supplied labor.
I just think it's interesting here that he's talking about how there's different externalities and it's not a simplistic problem of just one thing, but later he's going to kind of do that. So it's a little inconsistent.
Then bringing in people on H-1B visas. Now, if we're talking about pricing of labor, there's no question, obviously, that you bring in more people who are applicants for a job and the price of the labor goes down. That is a deflationary policy. Just in terms of affordability, it makes products more affordable. If labor is cheaper, product.
Real quick there. Yeah, again, it's that quick plausible argument here. And I do want to take issue with his use of the word deflationary. Right. It's a price decrease in that market, all else equal. So let's be precise in our language here, Mr. Shapiro.
Right.
Are more affordable. For the people who don't get those jobs, life is worse. For the broad American public, life is better because the affordability went up. Again, all economic policies have beneficiaries and have people who are harmed by those economic policies. The question is, how widespread are the beneficiaries and how discrete are the people who are being hurt and vice versa?
Okay. So
now, let's be adults about how we discuss it.
Yeah, I think that's an appropriate point. Like economic policy, that is to say, intervention does establish winners and losers. And so in that sense, again, he's dropping a few plausible and in this case, I think a correct evaluation of the situation, right? But it's driving an excuse for what Austrians and others have called intervention spirals. Okay, we're looking for different types of interventions to be piled on to make corrections for previous interventions, and on it goes.
Yep. No, absolutely. That's always a problem with the. I think Hayek made a point about that. I mean, it's just the using one. Yeah, there's just one intervention to fix the consequences of another intervention, and you just stack them to the point where, I mean, I think most industries in America right now suffer from that. Healthcare is probably like one of the worst ones, where it's like people will have this idea that like before the Affordable Care Act, we had a free market in healthcare. It's like, no, like,
not even close.
No, we did it, and we took it already. And I know this pretty well because when I was younger, I actually got it here in PA. I got licensed. I got my license for life and health insurance, and I was working on maybe getting into securities too. But I was doing that right around the time everything switched. So I'd already studied for all the craziness of our healthcare laws, and then adding the ACA into that, it was just like, just trying to even understand the system was half the reason why the market shrank, because everyone was like, this is just too much.
Yeah, it's a labyrinth of regulatory measures and special favors.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I keep coming back to this point, and a lot of the discussions I've had here around family policy, economic policy. Let's talk about rollback and repeal before any of these additional interventions. I mean, I wouldn't favor them anyway, but the reason we're here is because of those previous interventions of various kinds that tip the scales,
Yeah.
right? Favoritism, which Scripture forbids.
Right, and I appreciate what you said. Shapiro is acknowledging, this policy is picking winners and losers. And it's like, okay, but like, should that be what the government's doing? I mean, it's a little frustrating because like Shapiro he doesn't maybe do it as much these days, but he used to go around basically saying that he was a free market, libertarian guy, at least on the economic side. Foreign policy and social stuff, maybe not so much, but so. Older Shapiro videos, you'll hear him making the case for more laissez-faire stuff, but I guess I have my suspicions as to why, but there's various reasons why I think he's kind of softened his support for true laissez-faire markets, but we'll get into more of that.
All right.
Economics, when we're going to talk about these big issues. Okay, so here is the case for importing certain types of labor. One, there are, in fact, certain positions in the United States that require a level of expertise that may not be reachable in the numbers that are currently being churned out by American universities.
We can keep going.
That is a shortcoming of our educational system, and it is a problem.
Certain types, right.
And so you can say we should up our game. I agree. We should absolutely up our game educationally. But in the meantime, if you do not bring in the labor supply, particularly to tech will go find the labor supply. And so what you will end up with is an office that was employing 30 Americans and 3 H-1B visa people. If the costs grow too high, simply moving to another country where they hire 30 Indians and 0 Americans. Right? This is the problem with the reason companies offshore is not because it's easy or fun to simply move your company somewhere else. It's because the labor cost becomes so prohibitive in the United States that companies move away.
But what's driving up those labor costs, Ben? Like, can we talk about that?
Indeed.
And is it just the labor costs? I mean, because it's not just
the
labor
other costs. You already mentioned it.
Yeah.
Health insurance. Again, from earlier interventions. I mean, that goes back. I had a discussion with some folks here in Grand Rapids a couple weeks back about interventions that go back to the 1910s that have led to our healthcare situation. Further interventions in the 1940s during World War II with wage and price controls, and so employers, to get Rosie the Riveter into the factory, they had to induce or incentivize women to come into the factories with this fringe benefit of healthcare payments for doctors and so forth. And so, that again it looks like the market's doing that, right? Employers kind of float this opportunity, but it's because of the wage and price controls that the FDR administration had set in place. And so once you get past the war, the fringe benefits stick around. It's hard to pull something like that back. And again, it spirals into the Medicare, Medicaid in the 1960s. But all this, not to go on too much of a tangent, off ramp here, but merging back onto the highway, this is a huge part of what is driving labor costs in the U.S. And again, I don't know if Shapiro would disagree with that, but I talked to a good friend of mine a few years back and asked him, what's the biggest risk you take in your business as a medium-sized business owner? He said, flatly, quickly, hiring.
Yep.
Because of healthcare risks. That's really chief among them, among the risks for hiring folks. But right. And then this does indeed lead to some offshoring. Even in the tech sector, though, you can hire people across borders to do remote work at a much lower rate than your typical American worker. So it's not even necessary for the kind of tech work that's being done for people to come into the U.S. I mean, that labor can be found overseas, and you don't even have to move them. And this is even a further labor cost savings for the firms, because one of the things that those firms will have to do is sponsor the expatriate activity, and also including family benefits and so on. Again, my wife worked as a third-party contractor for a company that she did relocation services. And the companies that are bringing expats into the U.S., they pay a premium. And that's the interesting thing. They're willing to pay a premium for these folks to come in. And so that's a little bit contrary to, again, this simplistic version of what Shapiro is describing. He said, oh yeah, it means that wages are being suppressed. That's actually not the case. That these folks are being paid quite well and living quite comfortably in the U.S. in that expat kind of role. Expat from their countries, immigrants into the U.S., especially for these tech sector jobs. And all you got to do is look at the wages that people earn in Silicon Valley. So it is not the case that there's this massive wage suppression coming in these jobs, because again, if you're going to attract talent, you got to pay. You've got to pay.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I was just thinking, like, I remember when I was part of a small family business, and I remember one of the things that like people don't even think about is, like unemployment. Yeah, you as the employee pay into unemployment, but so does the employer. And the employer, the rate that you pay in, and I don't know if this is just if this is federal policy or state policy, but I remember that you have a rate that you pay, and that rate is based partly on how many claims there have been. So every time you hire someone, you got to make that evaluation of like, well, what happens if I have to fire them and they claim unemployment? That raises my rate. So there's all these like little factors that go into, and yeah, that's why there's so many small businesses that tend to be understaffed, because it's just easier to try to do more work with less people than to try or hire more people to do the job. But then so anyway, there's just like every single thing that comes out of that pay stub. If you're a an employee that gets a W-2, there's an equal, maybe sometimes greater sort of transaction or burden that's being put on the employer in many cases. That's why you see a lot of times, I think this kind of accelerated after COVID, that there's just more and more people doing work based on like this contracting, right? They're just like, well, rather than hire someone, we'll just have someone that like we're almost paying them full-time rates, but we're 1099ing them. And so but then it puts the person in the contract position, they might not be getting certain benefits that they would get if they were a full-time employee. So it's kind of it's all this stuff that's just it's a mixture of just so many variables.
Yeah, and there's another factor here. Part of the implication of what Shapiro and others are describing is the idea that if you import tech talent from another part of the world, that this is displacing the most highly skilled American workers in this sector. That's not the case either. As we look at the number of college majors who have come up in software engineering, it's those younger ones who are facing a little more unemployment. Perhaps maybe their skills aren't up to snuff. There could be a number of reasons why they're being outcompeted, but it is not the case when you look at expats, because of the additional cost to the firm, that it's not the case that wages are the only issue here, right? And it could be argued that there's an oversupply, not of foreign workers, but an oversupply of young tech workers who haven't yet acquired the skills to justify the kind of pay that they thought they were going to get when they walked out of college. And instead, a lot of those young people are working in areas outside their field and struggling to find work. So
it is amazing how many economic calculations and comparisons are done without even equalizing for age. I mean, I learned that from reading Soul, in disparities and discrimination. He talks about how like sometimes just the supposed like, this community makes less money than that community. And just like, what's the average age of the community? And some of the communities, it's like, well, they're older. So it's like, well, they've had more time to accumulate wealth.
Skills.
So
skills,
yeah,
of course.
Yeah, age can be a huge role in that. I'm sure there's other things like DEI might sometimes play a certain role in these decisions as well. I'm sure Shapiro would agree with repealing that.
Indeed.
Stuff.
Yeah. But that just goes, each of the items we've brought up here goes to the complexity of the judgments that entrepreneurs have to make with respect to who they're hiring. What kind of skill set are they looking for? What are the short run costs, long run costs? Is a married man a more effective worker than a single man? Yes. Yeah. I mean, history bears this out. So if you've got a married expat male who's in his mid 30s and a non-married U.S. male who's he's willing to work for less, but is he going to deliver the productivity? Yeah, historically speaking, probably not. And so again, this is another factor where entrepreneurs have got to make these judgments in their hiring decisions that are deeply complex and cannot be glossed over at the federal level with a one-size-fits-all policy.
You brought something. I want to say something to that, but it's going to make more sense to bring it up later. So I'm gonna bring Shapiro back up, and
okay.
I'll reference what you just said. Though it'll connect.
Okay.
And you can try to tariff them back, but all that does is artificially raise the price on Americans. Again, we're talking about affordability. There are trade-offs in economics.
I'll give Shapiro credit. He's been pretty good at being anti-tariff for as long as I've kind of followed him. So he's never been a tariff apologist as far as I know. So I'll give him credit.
All right.
He comes with the fun feeling that everybody in America is making American product. It comes with the very large downside that your products are economically inefficient, they don't work as well, and you're not globally competitive. Right? All policies have trade-offs. It is also better for the American people, broadly speaking, to bring in the best from other countries. Now, how do you determine the best? You can make, again, the case that the H-1B visa program is fatally flawed. It's not bringing in enough of the best. I will point out that many of our best founders in the United States are either immigrants or the children of immigrants who came in on H-1B visas or who came in just generally without an H-1B visa through other forms of legal immigration as students. And the reality is that maybe our screening procedures should be different, but we need to see specifics on what the screening procedures you're applying are that would allow for there to be, for example, an Elon Musk American citizen creating tens of thousands of jobs.
Did you have something there, Jeff? So you kind of...
yeah, again, I just think that speaks to the enculturation that happens in highly skilled labor markets, right? And you'll especially see this among, so again, some kernels of truth here that he's dropping, but you've got families that have high expectations for their children with respect to learning their English acquisition, that by and large, these higher skilled workers are coming with what you might call an assimilation attitude. And within 2 or 3 generations, you see intermarriage of the kids with more of the, I'll use air quotes here, but the native population, so to speak. And the enculturation takes, it seems to be a quicker process among the more highly skilled families, as opposed to the lower skilled workers that come in. But even there, lower skilled families that are workers that are filling some of those jobs are culturally conservative, dare I say? All right. And again, of course, you've got some bad apples here, but I keep coming back to Hoppe's proposal here that it's by invitation. You've got a work contract, come to work. And if you're ready to work, that demonstrates kind of a self-selection mechanism that you're willing to cooperate with the employer. You're willing to do what it takes to succeed in that particular culture, that particular company and community.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely.
Or the head of Google, Sundar Pichai, creating tens of thousands of jobs. Or the head of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, creating tens of thousands of jobs. Now, you can say that maybe if those people didn't exist, there would be an American who just did that job. But that is now living in the realm of theory. It's not living in the realm of reality. Brain draining other countries is also a good thing for America in terms of our own global competitiveness. I'd rather bring all the smartest people from around the globe, if they are going to, again, this is assuming the precondition that they are going to assimilate to American values, that they like America, that they are American patriots. If they're not, they shouldn't come in, period, no matter what industry they're in. But if they're going to be good American patriots, creating tens of thousands of jobs is a good thing while depriving those jobs from China, from other countries. Brain draining is good. We brain drained Germany in the 1930s, and that was quite good for the American economy. We have brain drained a number of other countries around the globe, which is why America is the global economic powerhouse.
So Shapiro was pro importing all the Nazi scientists, I guess, is what he's saying here.
Yeah. I'm not going to touch that one. Oh goodness. Yeah, you do pick up though here on the animus of sort of the anti-China vibe here, right? That
Yeah.
if it's good for us and it sticks it to China, then all the better. Well, that's one way to live.
Yeah, that's maybe that's the only way we'll get conservatives to be less, like to chill a little bit on the immigration enforcement extremism, is to say, like, you need to let more immigrants in to own China or something. I don't know, right? Like, the
Yeah.
bad reason to support a better policy, maybe, but it's because I think, and I'm not an expert on this, but I think the brain drain idea is kind of more or less it's not at least a given that that's going to happen if you're allowing the free. I think the more actually, and maybe Shapiro's what Shapiro's advocating for. I think the issue is more you get the brain drain more with the sort of limited, sort of like not closed, not open immigration system than you would with a completely free immigration. So I guess he's being consistent here. He's an interventionist in immigration just enough to get the best people here and to try to brain drain the other countries so that he can, I mean, he thinks it's going to make our economy better and help our security interests. So, I mean, I can kind of like make it make sense from his worldview, but I just disagree with his worldview there.
Yeah, well, and one of the things that has been, you mentioned that he's been a consistent critic of tariffs, and economists have talked about tariffs as a form of, air quotes here, beggar thy neighbor, right, to weaken them economically. Well, again, a lot of these countries where folks are coming from have their own sets of problems. You have nationalization of industries, you have socialistic policies, massive welfare states. And so this squelches private investment and opportunities in those countries. And indeed, the U.S. is a better opportunity for individuals to bring their families, granted. But I'm not sure from a Christian standpoint that I should be, I don't know. I want to be fair here. I don't think he's cheering on communistic policies that remain in China or in Venezuela. But again, I think that we ought to be cheering on more small L liberal economic policies throughout the world, where it produces better opportunity for people throughout the globe to make investments, to have sound currency so they can save and invest towards the future. That would be my hope. So, and this, in doing so, you kind of stem the tide. You stem the tide for sort of that massive immigration where it's much more difficult to differentiate, where you have destroyed economies in a place like, again, take Venezuela or Colombia or something. And then with this massive group, this mass humanity, how do you differentiate? And that presents another set of problems. So I'm not doing the Kamala Harris thing saying, oh, it's only U.S. policies that are wrecking this country. Cuba's only in the state of affairs it's in because of U.S. embargoes. Like, no, they're socialists. They've destroyed their own. Venezuela, they're socialists. They've destroyed their own. And so I would be pulling for genuinely free economies in those situations, as Venezuela used to be in the 1950s.
Well, it's just true that many of our economic policies have been aimed at just increasing suffering and pushing people away from liberalizing their economies. I mean, we did no favors to like Russia after the Soviet Union broke up. We did not, our shock therapy was not, and part of this was that, like, you had Bill Clinton and the Democratic Party trying to teach free markets to Russia. So, not a good recipe, right? But, even if they were good intentioned, but there was obviously, and that's the thing, like Ben's anti-tariff in terms of like, he doesn't think it's good economic. You're not going to make Americans richer or spur on American industry that way, but he's definitely pro-sanction. He's definitely pro-economic, warfare towards political enemies and whatnot, which there is like if he was a Christian, which even if I was going to try to appeal to his Jewish religion, like it doesn't seem to me to be a very like, loving your neighbor thing to do. You know what I mean? Like we're supposed to
Indeed.
lead by example. And if you're advocating for like, take all the talented entrepreneurs out of a country and then don't trade with them and
Mhm.
then maybe do some, military interventions
Right.
around them or with them, it's like,
And the people who are left in those nations are, they're disaffected, they're poor,
right.
they're ripe for radicalization and loyalty to the leader.
Yeah.
So this again, I mean, I think where libertarianism and again, I appreciate the episode that Dan and your viewpoint on Dave Smith was that really that's a if you will litmus test for libertarians is that foreign policy mindset, the foreign policy framework. Are you stoking and provoking others towards war or suffering to the point where war is the only option? We shouldn't be going down that road.
No, I 100% agree. All right.
So again, when we are talking about affordability, we have to talk about things like supply. And conflating all of these issues and pretending they don't exist doesn't solve the affordability crisis. It just means that we have an affordability crisis and we rip each other to shreds over sort of ancillary issues. Because I think, again, everyone on the right agrees that people who shouldn't be in America shouldn't be in America. The question is, should we bring the best and brightest here if they are going to be great Americans? And my answer is absolutely. Should we be having more people come here to found companies who are going to be good Americans? Sure. Is the H-1B visa program totally geared toward that? No. Maybe there need to be changes there. But again, pretending that we can just go autarkic, that is a mistake. The reason this comes up is because yesterday, the president of the United States was on with Laura Ingraham, and he was asked about H-1B visas. And he's being ripped up by a certain portion of the right for his answer here, which frankly, I think is mostly reasonable.
There's never going to be a country like what we have right now.
And does that
the
mean
Republicans have to talk about it, Laura.
And does that mean the H-1B visa thing will not be a big priority for your administration? Because if you want to raise wages for American workers, you can't flood the country with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of foreign workers.
You also do have to bring in talent. When
we have plenty of talented people here.
No, you don't.
We don't have talented people here?
No, you don't have. You don't have certain talents, and people have to learn. You can't take people off an unemployment line and say, I'm going to put you into a factory where we're going to make missiles, or I'm going to put
How did we ever do it before?
Well,
I'll
give you an example. In Georgia, they raided because they wanted illegal immigrants out. They had people from South Korea that made batteries all their lives. Making batteries are very complicated. It's not an easy thing and very dangerous. A lot of explosions, a lot of problems. They had like 500 or 600 people, early stages, to make batteries and to teach people how to do it. Well, they wanted them to get out of the country. You're going to need that, Laura. I mean, I know you and I disagree on this. You can't just say a country's coming in, going to invest $10 billion to build a plant, and going to take people off an unemployment line who haven't worked in 5 years, and they're going to start making missiles. It doesn't work that way.
Okay, the president.
So that was a long bit there, and that was kind of a reference at the beginning of the show with sort of the, several steps removed back, what's spurring a lot of this controversy. But I didn't know if anything you wanted to add to that. I mean, there's a lot, not just on, I don't think I actually heard the thing he said there at the end there. He's just like, well, we can't, they're not smart enough to come in here and make our missiles. And I'm just sitting there just like, oh okay. Oh, well, but I guess we won't make as many missiles.
Provide bodies for the production of the military industrial complex. Okay. He uses the missile example, but as you know, I go to the Mises Institute in Auburn, and coming from Michigan, if I drive, we'll go down I-85 for a stretch, and there's a massive Kia and Hyundai plant, and indeed there were apparently some folks who weren't properly documented and so on. And so it's in that case, right, you've got a factory that you might call like mid-skill sort of jobs, where it takes a little bit of time to learn, but it's not rocket science, missile science, okay? And so there is an acquisition of skills that happens among a lower skilled group. But the question I have again is, were they invited? Was it a legitimate exchange of contract? And if that's the case, and again, the enculturation is towards assimilating into that community, it'll happen over time. It'll happen over time. And the history of the world has been one of people movement. And so, again, we're back to that Hoppian principle of invitation.
Yeah, no, I agree. We'll keep going here. Ben did hint at the bit about prices and what's causing it, and I think he's going to jump back into here in a little bit. So,
and it happens to be right about this. When he says there isn't talent, again, people are reading that, I think, wrongly. He's saying there's not enough talent in particular industries at this time. You need a transitional skill set force to come in and sometimes teach Americans to do something. I'm not sure what's totally unreasonable about that. I think, frankly, there's a lot of demagoguery of these issues going on because people don't want to acknowledge the realities of how economics actually works. It's more fun to rail against the idea that there are any shortcomings at all anywhere in the American labor force, or that it's actually good to brain drain other countries, or that we should have the best and brightest from other places come here and engage in our economy. And again, I love Laura Ingraham. I think she's wonderful. When Laura says, if you go back to the 1950s and 60s, how did we do it then? The answer is there were a lot of foreign-born people who actually were founding some of these companies and were involved in the production of some of our most sophisticated technologies. I mean, she's talking about missile technologies, for example. I mean, it was an ex-Nazi, Werner von Braun, who was heading up our rocket program in the United States. And that's not a defense of Werner von Braun's Nazi associations. That is a recognition that importation of talent actually matters when you are crafting a dynamic economy. Of course. But it seems that when it comes to affordability, people are more interested, again, in demagoguing the issues than actually talking about solutions to the issues. And if you do that, what you'll end up with is a lot of people who are angry about affordability.
do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, yeah. And, it's interesting as we're moving through this segment that affordability is not so much a problem in the tech sector, right? I mean, think of your tech products. If we're talking about televisions or, relatively speaking, cars are a little bit inflationary, but not nearly like the higher education markets, not nearly as inflationary as healthcare markets, not nearly as inflationary as college textbooks, for crying out loud, over the last 20 years. The kinds of items we're talking about here that are being built by the folks that Shapiro is referencing here are in industries where we're seeing a tendency for increased productivity. And so in that sense, he's correct, right? These are very productive individuals who are producing goods and services, whether software or other, tech products, your smartphones and the components, et cetera, where we're seeing falling consumer prices. And so again, there's a number of kernels of truth that he's dropping here that I think, we're trying to be fair here. And I think that's those are some reasonable explanations for what's happening in those markets.
His points are reasonable. It's just they're inconsistent because he still has this, he doesn't want to let the market decide who the best and brightest are to come here. He wants some element of, a central planner coming in and being this middleman between all these industries and the people that want to come and potentially work here, which that's that's the fundamental problem. But all right.
Get no actual answers that provide affordability. When Laura says she's interested in raising American wages, everyone's interested in raising American wages. But the problem is this: if you raise the American wages and you raise the American prices faster than the wages, then the wages get eaten up by the price increases. This is what happened during the Biden administration. You need two things: increased wages and lowering prices. And the way that you do that is with innovation and with increased supply. That is how that works. You need both of those things. I can artificially raise the wages in the city of Detroit in 1950 by unionizing the entire workforce and negotiating extraordinarily lucrative contracts. And by 1965, the American auto industry will be getting its lunch eaten by the Japanese. You can do this. And there are ways to artificially increase the price of labor. What you end up doing is increasing the price of the product that the labor produces, and that ends up.
Yeah, and he's mostly right here. Yeah, I mean, you artificially, you just go in and say, well, let's just pay people more, raise the rate, and you're going to see. We saw this even when, even with just the stimuluses that happened, even back during COVID, I saw people having their rents raised and being told well, we're raising the rents because we know you got stimulus. So that's sometimes it happens slowly, sometimes it happens instantaneously. When you just kind of decree through fiat, people get more money.
Sure. And the Detroit example's pertinent for me living in Michigan. But again, that situation, is a result of an earlier intervention, the 1914 Clayton Antitrust Act, and then others. I believe it was 1935 National Labor Board Relations Act, all granting special favors to unions for collective bargaining. This is a form of privilege that other groups in labor markets simply don't have. And with this privilege, this government granted privilege, they are able to drive those labor costs up in the city of Detroit and so on. And the economic consequences of that are laid bare for anyone who wants to take a trip to Detroit or Pontiac or Flint and see what's happened as a result of those forms of favoritism. Right. And meanwhile, you just got to drive a little bit farther south into Indiana and see Toyota plants here and Honda plants there, and workers who are not in a unionized, privileged sort of situation, who do work in these what are called right to work states. And you can see some flourishing economies at the local level. Again, investment, not only foreign investment, but foreign leadership coming in and demonstrating a little different way to do things, whether it's a Honda, Toyota plant, or a BMW plant. I mean, you have the Germans come in and put on some of their specific expertise in the production process in those BMW plants. And so this is, from my view, no harm, no foul. I mean, this is investment. You have American workers there, and over time you see a level of cooperation, right, through voluntary processes that leads to more flourishing local economies and to peaceful coexistence. And you see this throughout those foreign direct investments.
But like as good Austrians, we know that and because Ben's kind of right in terms of that, if wages go up but prices just go up and eat that's not helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And well, then how do we get lowering prices and raising wages? The only way we get lowering prices at all is through innovation and through this happens not, you can't centrally plan this. This has to be done through just normal market processes and kind of getting government completely out of the way of these things to happen, because otherwise people are going to malinvest. And even artificially granting favors, whether you're granting favors to corporations to effectively push out competition and monopolize certain industries, or to labor unions, that the end result is going to be the same.
And of course, one of the groups that we talk about that receive favoritism over time are the commercial banks. And this is a situation that, as libertarians, as Austrians, I think we need to keep coming back to, is the deflationary growth of really the post-Civil War era and running up to the creation of the Federal Reserve. That is a period of sustained increases in productivity, slightly falling wages, but over time your purchasing power is growing. So sure, everyone would like a situation where my wages are going up and prices are falling, but if prices are falling a little faster than my wages, this is what we call deflationary growth. And that is a natural path when you have sound money and free markets. But it's been kind of forgotten to history and sort of the narrative that has looked at that era as, it gave rise to the Gilded Age and all these things, and we needed the progressives to save us from laissez-faire. Life expectancy during that period continued to increase. Overall standards of living continued to increase in a deflationary growth period. But of course, we go back again. It's always those pesky 1910s, always coming back to bite us, Jacob. And
I know.
That's that era of the progressives and interventionism.
The book directly behind my big head is The Progressive Era by Rothbard. So I mean,
I did it by our good friend Dr. Newman, Dr. Patrick Newman. So that's a great one.
Yes. All right, we'll keep going here.
Making that product non-competitive, and then eventually the industry dies. Short-term thinking here is the enemy of actual economic health, robust economic health in the long term, which requires innovation and malleability of labor supply, and movability of labor is a big thing here. And again, none of this is to argue that we should have free, unfettered immigration or the United States is just in economic form. I started this conversation by acknowledging full scale the H-1B visa program may be letting in too many people. It may be letting in the wrong people. But the argument that is being made against the H-1B visa is an argument that proves too much, as we used to say in law school. It is too broad an argument, and it basically says we should simply shut our borders. And again, if what we are worried about is, quote unquote, the price of labor in the United States, and we are saying that we need higher wages, then we probably should go all the way and just ban tech. I mean, these arguments, these are not good arguments. The argument that economic health comes, for example, from artificially increasing the price of labor by restricting supply, that applies just as much to tech developments themselves, to robotics, for example, as it does to importation of labor. If you want to maintain manufacturing jobs in Ohio, and that's like the only thing you care about is increasing the actual wage paid for a manufacturing job in Ohio, you probably should ban all robotics. Because if you take a look at where all those manufacturing jobs went in the
Don't give them ideas, Ben. they might do that.
I'm wondering. Yeah. Well, and I'm wondering here too. I mean, of course, there are
United States manufacturing.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. There are implications here in the economy, and I think this is where we want to eventually get to, is when labor markets are transformed through various forms of favoritism, this is going to have some cultural effects, right? And one of the things that I know we wanted to touch on is the impact on family life, and how or whether economics has anything to do with it. So when he's been talking here, I think eventually he's going to get to a point where he's kind of talking out of both sides of his mouth. He's going to say that culture and family life and marriage and fertility have nothing to do. I mean, he actually says it has nothing to do with economics. And yet at the same time, he's got some policy tweaks with economics that, it affects labor markets. It affects firms. It affects consumer outcomes, but it doesn't affect family choices. I mean, this is a bizarre kind of claim that he goes on to make. And I don't know if he's getting close there. I think it was minute 17 or 18 or so, but these are some odd claims that he's going to put forward as really a part of this affordability theme. And so, of course, with affordability, he's going to touch on, I believe he lives in, or used to live in New York. Is he
No, he used to live in Los Angeles.
Okay. I think he kind of alludes eventually to affordability in New York City and other major metro areas, and whether this has anything to do with family life and so forth. So
yeah. So what I'll do is I'll jump ahead a little bit here, because
okay.
the part we're getting to, that we're alluding to, he starts by talking about his appearance on Trigonometry with Konstantin Kizin, and he'll lead into, so yeah, it's like the 15 to 18 minute mark. So we'll play that segment, and then we'll kind of drive home the error there.
Okay,
let me pull that up.
I mean, I was looking around at property prices, real estate prices in New York. I'm doing pretty well for myself. I feel kind of poor looking at those things.
Oh, no, it's unaffordable. And I'm not saying it's not affordable.
Right.
It absolutely is unaffordable. And if you wanted to make a political difference, what you would do is you would relieve the building regulations. You would make it easier for people to build, not harder. You wouldn't rent control, because if you stop rent controlling, then that creates incentive for people to build. You would allow people to build up further. You would get rid of many of the code regulations that are kind of antiquated. Like there are things you actually could do.
And if he just stopped talking here, we'd be fine. But he keeps talking.
Yeah. right. And then just quickly shifts over to this. I believe he goes right to personal responsibility and wagging his finger at young people for making poor personal choices.
Yep.
And then if you're a young person and you can't afford to live here, then maybe you should not live here. I mean, that is a real thing. Yeah, I know that we've now grown up in a society that says that you deserve to live where you grew up. But the reality is that the history of America is almost literally the opposite of that. The history of America is you go to a place where there is opportunity. And if the opportunities are limited here and they're not changing, then you really should try to think about other places where you have better opportunities. Again, that's not saying that public policy can't change. I think it can, but I think that the solutions being offered are untenable. Okay, so I agree with me, as a famous man once said. So as you will note there, I'm offering two specific things for people to do. One is change the public policy where you're at. If you're in New York, change the public policy so that the public policy is better, alleviate some of the problems that you have with affordability. by doing all the things that I'm talking about right there. And then I say that as an individual human being, if you are upset with the public policy and you feel like it's not going to change anytime in the near future, and that your life is being ruined by that public policy, you're left with two choices. One is to sit there and be miserable and fulminate against a system that is not changing. Again, if you can change the system, great, do it. Vote out Mamdani. Vote out the bad city council. Vote in somebody who understands basic economics and isn't a third worldist socialist. Do all those things. Great. Stay and fight. I did this in California for years. And then there came a point where I realized California was never going to provide me the public policy backdrop for a successful life, the kind of life that I wanted to live. And so I moved. And
Interesting
again,
here.
that comes with costs.
It sounds like an argument for freedom of movement, voting with your
Right.
feet.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. You're allowed to do that within the United States, Jeffrey, but in the world, not so much, right? Like
Especially if you're,
if
coming from China, right?
Right. I was about to say that. If you don't like living in communist China and you're like, I want to go to capitalist America, it's like, well, hold up there. Hold on. We got to make sure you're not secretly a communist.
Yeah. And to be fair, right. Okay. So he talks about the brain drain from, let's say, China or Venezuela. Like these are places where indeed bad policy is the norm. And is it sensible for people to leave those situations? Well, yeah, that's rational. Again, with the caveat that you have a contract, that you are not quite literally trespassing, to uphold a biblical ethic there. And so this is, again, we've got to thread a little bit of a needle here, I think, and it is a nuanced, complicated conversation. But what I don't necessarily appreciate here is the idea that it seems like he's saying, well, policy doesn't matter, doesn't dictate action, but go ahead and take action. And it seems a little bit incongruous, but
yeah,
it's a tough decision. I get it. I have relatives that live in California, and they're certainly fighting the good fight, and they stay because of the weather and friendships and so on. But I don't want to sell that short. But
it's also not like I think. Well, I'll say it now. I think the biggest problem in his calculation is that he's giving credence to the fact that the policies of the system at the local level can be bad, but then completely ignoring all the federal level policy that makes not just maybe other places, maybe sometimes equally bad, but just the prospect of moving very difficult. Like if you're in, Arizona and the job opportunity is in, Florida or Maine, unless you magically get, like if you beforehand find someone who wants to hire you and pay all your expenses, fine. But if you're talking about like, well, what if you have a family of 4 kids or 5 kids and you're like, this is bad, but what am I supposed to do? Like move all the way across the country. And then like, once I get there, I figure it out. That's not tenable. Maybe that's tenable for like a 19-year-old or a 21-year-old, a 23-year-old single man. That's not tenable for like, I'm 33 with 5 kids. If I had to move halfway across the country right now and go, knocking around the, doors or the internet to try to find a job, that's not exactly, super tenable for someone in my position. Right. Yeah. So it, especially when we get into which the next 2 minutes here, we'll kind of connect the dots here, something where he's completely undermining the other things that are coming into this equation, like monetary policy and inflation.
Yeah, and that's a surprising bit here that he doesn't touch on that. And you're right. I think our good friend Connor O'Keefe over at the Mises Institute gave a talk a little while ago about the importance of that local policy and supply restrictions. And yes, he's absolutely right in that respect. I think, again, Shapiro's putting forward an argument for repeal. That's good at the local level. At the state level, you have property tax questions, property tax differences from state to state. And then, of course, as we know, the big one at the federal level when it comes to affordability for housing, we got to talk about the Federal Reserve and its, the way in which inflationary policy impacts that housing market across the board. And it is true that some geographic areas experience different degrees of inflation in housing markets. And again, each municipality has its own complicated issues, but underlying that, as we know, that points right to monetary policy.
Right. No, 100%. And so I'll play there's like 2 more minutes here we'll play, which will get to kind of the punchline we've been building towards, and then we'll tear it apart for our closer.
We'll end with a flurry. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Maximize this again.
I'm not pretending that moving doesn't have costs. And when I moved, I made sure that, I'm lucky. My parents were able to move with me. Our in-laws were able to move. A couple of sisters were able to move. We were able to take our entire family, which at that point was actually geographically disparate, and move into the same area. No one has talked more publicly about the importance of having a supportive family structure near you than I have. It is also true that if you're a young person, a 20, 21-year-old, 22-year-old, and you're not finding successful conditions in the city, and those conditions are not likely to change. If you want to seek happiness, you can either get angry at the system that's not going to change, which will not make your life better, or you can do the things that are in your control, like maybe looking outside of New York City. This seems fairly inarguable to me. That is not an argument for, quote unquote, abandoning the city or abandoning your principles or anything like that. Every individual has to make their own decision about what level of bad policy they are willing to undergo in order to maintain their status in the city. But simply shouting at the moon doesn't solve problems. It doesn't. David Harsanyi has an excellent piece over at the Washington Examiner talking about this. And he quotes one of the very online people saying, quote, "If we want Democrats to have a supermajority, this is the message for the GOP to adopt. Tell people they need to move. Don't form family bonds. Worship the banks and big corporations. My goodness." Okay, first of all, that's absurd. There is no one in America who's talked more about forming family bonds than I have. And let me explain something about forming family bonds. The reason that people in New York City are not forming family bonds is not because the price of rent is too high. That is not the reason. If you get married, there are 2 of you in New York City, likely both of you have jobs now sharing one space. So it is cheaper for you to get married and live with your working spouse in that same apartment complex than it would have been for you to do it by yourself. Okay, the reason that we have a marriage crisis in America is not because of economics. This is a lie. There are places all over the world that are poorer than the United States that have much higher marriage rates. In fact, one of the bizarre things about the way that the developed countries work is the more developed the country, the fewer people tend to get married and the fewer children they have. So this notion that, broad speaking, Americans are not having kids because they're too poor is silly.
So that's what we were kind of building towards for the last hour, which just the good old simple univariate analysis. It's just like, poor countries don't. I mean, I don't even. First of all, I'd want to fact check him on that. I'd be like, really, like every country that's less economically well off than us has higher marriage rates. Is that really the case? I wouldn't presume it's one way or the other. I'd presume you would just kind of see a mixed bag. But yeah, obviously this is your big area of focus. So what's missing from Shapiro's analysis there?
Well, I guess we could start with that claim, and I won't take them in order here, but start with that claim that poorer nations have these higher marriage rates. Well, that's in the West, or what economists often measure the West, economically speaking, as the OECD countries. If people want to look at data, you just go to the OECD website. And actually, what we see are that wealthier nations like Luxembourg and Switzerland have lower marriage rates than the U.S. And poorer countries like Costa Rica and Colombia also have lower marriage rates than the U.S. So his claim here in the West is just empirically false. And I'm wondering if in his mind he's thinking of maybe Central Asian or African countries that have higher marriage rates. Well, if you look at the manner of family formation, or I should say the form of families in those parts of the world, one of the reasons that they have higher marriage rates is because of polygamy. It actually is. I mean, and not only that, but you have more child marriage. I mean, this is kind of a from our standpoint, a really gross reality. And I think from a Christian standpoint, that is not what we are called to. It doesn't lead to human flourishing. Paul makes that clear, as does the history of the scriptures. But nonetheless, that's one of the reasons why the poor in other parts of the world are have these higher marriage rates. And so if you look at the West, which will tend to have a form of Christian civilization, broadly speaking, you will see a little bit different outcome. And so that's just an empirically false claim that poorer countries have higher marriage rates. Some wealthier countries have lower rates. Some poor countries have lower marriage rates than the U.S. And so this is something he misses the target on. And so, but then to go ahead and say that, this is only cultural, right? Again, we're back to this only personal choices matter. Culture is what matters most. This is kind of the tagline of a lot of conservatives. And they dismiss economics. What I've tried to do in my work is explain that our culture is formed over time by the way in which our economic system has been intervened or interposed into by government power. So I'm not the first to come with the term. Professor Holzman, a sociologist by the name of Toporowski, both came forward with the term the inflation culture. And that's something that I borrow numerous times in my work. But what Shapiro is pointing towards culture, I pulled up a paper earlier today from Melissa Kearney, and she's a family economist leading a project at Notre Dame. And she's done some good work, some good empirical work, but the Notre Dame project and the family, I'm not super familiar with it, but I do have a concern that they're going to lean towards what might be called pro-natalist policies. And here's something, and that is something later in the video that I think that Shapiro kind of gets right. He says, these pro-natalist interventions to redistribute income from some households to other households to boost fertility numbers, like that's not going to work. And I agree. I mean, it's number one, it's a property rights violation for those households from whom property and wealth is taken. So for me as a Christian, that's the end of the story. But with that said, there is a cultural change, and Kearney and her co-author point this out in a recent paper. Instead of looking at inflation and saying, okay, families just look at the price of eggs, or they look at the price of rent, and a young couple looks at each other and says, did you see the price of eggs? I guess we got to call the wedding off. Like, no, nobody is saying that, right? This is this short-term argument that people are making, saying, yeah, see, economics doesn't matter. You're overblowing the situation. And here's another area where it's really interesting. If you read what Mises says about divorce or about family formation in his book, Socialism, if you don't read carefully, it sounds like what Shapiro is saying here. He has a line where it says, look, economic and social issues impacting households and marriages, it's kind of overblown and overstated. But what we have to remember in reading Mises in Socialism is that he is replying to the socialists. The socialists are saying that the only thing that matters is material conditions. It's really that strict philosophical materialism that Mises is combating. All right, so that's an important thing to keep in mind if some readers want to go and look at that. In other writings,
he's arguing against like a cartoonish determinist view of saying that it's the sole factor, right?
Right.
Just like Shapiro is kind of doing the like cartoonish opposite, where it's just like it doesn't impact it at all.
Right. And so this is something to read carefully on. But I mentioned Kearney a couple times, and so some of the conclusions in this paper are that marriage is being delayed and fertility is being lowered, especially. That's the focus. But it's being delayed because of changing cultural norms, um, changing economic opportunities, and changes in the broader social or cultural forces at play. And the most important one, as she and her co-author did research, was the lack of leisure time is driving lower fertility rates in their qualitative analysis, where they actually ask people, why are you deciding to have fewer children? And it's primarily the leading cause is because of a decrease in leisure time. Well, it's my view that the reason we have less leisure time among married couples is because we're living in this inflationary world. One of the key statistics that I came across in my research over the past few years was that since, wouldn't you guess it, the early 1970s, that since that time, if you are to earn the median household income for a family of four, a household of four, it now requires 2,000 additional median wage work hours. That's a full-time position. So, of course, if you've got one sort of breadwinner in the 1970s, fast forward 3 generations, and now you need a second full-time earner, of course there's less leisure time.
Right.
Of course there's less leisure time. And if this is how we raise children with our spare time, if you will, of course we're going to have fewer. So please spare me. That economics has nothing to do with marriage or fertility.
I know. And he goes on maybe like a few minutes later where we stopped, and he's like, this whole idea of like that, like there was just one person working and it was enough to sustain the family. Like that was just a blip. And that was just an accident that was the result of like the end of World War II, and that everyone was destroyed and it was only America producing. And that's why that happened. And again, this is a univariate thing. And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure it has nothing to do with the institution of the Federal Reserve and the inflation caused by the monetary policy that we have and inflationary spending and all of this. And you know, I've tracked Shapiro for a long time on this Federal Reserve stuff.
Okay.
And the reason I thought the context that we all played was important, because you can see whether it's immigration or it's economics, his view of the world is shaping a lot of his evaluations of economics. And I think and I've heard him say this before, the reason he doesn't talk about the Federal Reserve is he says, well, people that talk about the Federal Reserve tend to be anti-Semitic. Right. And it's like, well, what do you mean? Then you see all the memes of Ben Shapiro on Twitter, back when it was Twitter, posting about how he was calling Ron Paul an anti-Semitic and saying that Ron Paul wants to strangle Jews. Why? Because all Ron Paul would basically say is that he wants to stop foreign aid to Israel and not fight a bunch of foreign wars that are partly motivated.
And everywhere else, by the way.
Right,
And
exactly. And everywhere else, right? But all of this coming down to, it's like, oh, so, you know, if you were someone who wanted America to continue fighting a bunch of wars and to keep on sending a bunch of foreign aid, especially in one region of the world, you might have a good reason.
Would be the way to do it.
Right? Exactly, right? So at that point, then you have this. And by the way, I'm not even saying Shapiro is like sitting there connivingly thinking all of this explicitly, but I'm saying that his incentives are pushing him. He's like, you know, subconsciously, he's like, well, I can't go that way because I need to be able to keep these things. So then, like, the only logical conclusion then is to be like, well, then economics can't have anything to do with with the family, which is just so patently absurd, especially when isn't like, I think finances are still cited as like the number one reason of divorce.
Right. Yeah. And I think you make an important question there, because if you strike at the central bank, then you strike at the warfare state. And there's nothing really, I don't know what Shapiro's position was with respect to Ukraine. I don't know if he's about, funding that, or if it's sort of the
he's
John
pro-funding.
McCain syndrome of, you never saw a war you didn't like.
You know what
Um,
Shapiro said about Ukraine, which is just sickening. He said the Ukraine war was a bargain.
Hmm.
All the dead Ukrainians, all the dead Russians. He said it's a bargain.
Hmm.
We get to weaken Russia without
Yeah.
using American troops
Hmm.
or American intervention. It's a bargain. Again, so like, you know, I think maybe people who didn't like, you know, maybe watch the whole way to the stream might
Yeah.
wonder like why earlier, even when Shapiro is making semi-decent points,
Hmm.
it's like we're almost reluctant to give it to him. It's because he, you know, he said he's pro family values. It's like, okay, how many families have your policies destroyed, Ben?
Mhm,
You
mhm.
know, and that, I mean, you're blind to the families that your policies are destroying, you know, across the globe. And
Mhm.
then, you know, clearly also blind to the families being destroyed by this. I mean, it's just everything.
By bombs, bullets, and guns.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Like when that whole thing about how after World War II, that like the single breadwinner was just a blip. It's like, well, as you
Yeah.
just said, the
Yeah. The
cost of
econ.
living has risen so much that you
Mhm,
need a second breadwinner. Like, well,
right.
what's causing that, Ben?
Mhm,
Like,
right.
why is it wow? Because he'll say, well, you know, free markets and all this innovation, it's lowering prices for all these things. It's like, okay, it's lowering prices for some things,
Mhm,
and yet the cost of living is, more than doubled, more than
mhm,
tripled from that time. So why? What is driving that? There's only one answer.
mhm.
I mean, there's one main answer for that
Yeah.
large of a rate. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
And just to like give you a little bit of an update, I've had the good opportunity over the last month or so to travel to a couple different conferences, and one of them, it was in Madrid, Spain, and an economist there, Philip Bagus, gave a nice talk on what he called the state culture. I've been thinking about the inflation culture, and I think it belongs as a subset of. I like that title. You might say the state culture. You might say the intervention culture. And of course, if you look at Rothbard, we've got three types of intervention. Um, you have the autarkic, you have binary, where it's one against one, or the triangular. For folks interested in Rothbard's view on intervention, that's a great place to look in Power and Market. But then there are also, you might say, I would say, species of intervention. You have regulatory, which he did touch on early in the video. Regulatory interventions with respect to housing limitations. You have fiscal interventions, which of course speaks to taxation. It speaks to the welfare state, taxing and spending. But again, something that he ignores conveniently is monetary interventionism, and it's been at the root of much hidden destruction. And so to ignore it, we ignore it at our peril when it comes to families. But some folks are maybe, I'll try and be generous here, turning a blind eye to the impact that that the Federal Reserve has in funding the warfare state. And I don't follow Shapiro, but some of those comments, boy, I'll just say they're unfortunate to say the least. And yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, how it's just like I don't know how, and maybe it's because I'm a former lefty, but when he was talking about how like, well, I moved my whole family from Los Angeles to Tennessee, and I'm just sitting there just like, yeah, dude, you're rich.
Mhm.
Like, of course. So I mean, it's just
Yeah.
like when you say stuff like that, it's like
Yeah.
you can maybe understand why we do have a rising like I think
A
he
rising
thinks.
civil war in the right.
Well, right, and you see people on the left and right
Mhm.
embracing more of a kind of socialistic, kind of nationalistic view of the economy that like we need the government to economically benefit Americans, and it's like now they're misguided,
Mm,
but to some extent they're reacting against this cronyism, and
sure.
I understand it as someone
Yeah.
who came from the left. It's like, well, I understand it when you think the cronyism is capitalism, then of course you're gonna say, "Well, that can't be the answer."
Mhm.
And then someone like Ben Shapiro who, you know, e sometimes I think I have more ire for him. I pay attention to him because it's like, I go to an evangelical church where I know a lot of
Mhm.
people listen to the Daily Wire and listen to Ben
Mhm.
Shapiro. And it's like, I want to know what he's saying, because I think that there's something about the person who just is misguided, but maybe has like their heart in the right place, versus
Mhm.
someone who maybe sometimes kind of says some things that sound nice and that are right, but that is kind
Mhm.
of like a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that's kind of how I feel about Shapiro sometimes, is that
Yeah.
he'll kind of co-opt kind of free market libertarian ideas, but
Borrow it
then
where it's
mix it
convenient. Yeah.
exactly, and then mix it in with all this protectionism and
Mhm.
interventionism in different ways that just is really unfortunate. And I think, just to end it, we're both Christians. I think we as Christians need to be thinking about, whether it's foreign policy
Mhm.
or it's economics, we need to be pursuing, if we're going to have a state, policies that are in the direction of increasing human flourishing, that are increasing the ability of human
Yeah.
beings created in the image of God to respect that inherent dignity that we all have as being created in the image of God, and there's the individual micro level of respecting that on
Mhm.
person to person levels,
Yeah,
and
neighbor
then
to neighbor. Yep.
yeah, and then there's like I think Shapiro gives some credence to the impact that systems can have on hurting individual
Mhm.
prosperity and
Yeah, at the
liberty
local level, he talks
at the
about
local
that,
level,
right?
but he seems completely blind to the suffering caused by the Federal Reserve and the warfare state, and that just seems to be like, uh, you know, I
It's a
it's
tremendous
hard
blind spot. It's a
it
tremendous
it
blind
it's
spot, and
it's hard
it's
to give charitable interpretation sometimes to someone, just to be like
I
is it
understand.
really that it's a blind spot, or is it like, "Oh, I can't see it."
Mhm. Yeah. I understand, and that's a challenge as we interact in the area of controversy, is to approach it with I do not like the word winsome, but the ability to give someone the benefit of the doubt until they show us their cards. Okay.
Sure, yeah.
Once you lay down your cards, then we can call a spade a spade. And it does seem that with some of the commentary that Shapiro has made with respect to the warfare state, regardless of which nation is blowing up whom, that kind of flippant response to human carnage it's beyond the pale for Christians and for libertarians, and it is a shame to see him co-opt a few plausible arguments that kind of smell like freedom, but it's let's say those are artificial ingredients
Yeah.
in a recipe that
Yeah, I mean,
don't
it's just, how
swallow it.
can how can you be, you can't be pro-life and pro-family values and be pro-Federal Reserve and
And
pro-military
pro-war. Yeah,
interventionism. It's
that's right.
just not possible. So,
Incongruent.
yep.
It's
Uh,
incoherent.
yep. Jeff, this was a lot of fun. I was glad I was able to get you on to help me
Thank you.
unpack
Oh,
all this stuff. Do you want to go ahead and just tell people, if they want to check out, some of the more of your work and your writings
sure.
and things like that, just to tell people where they can, find any of that.
Yeah, you bet. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am on Twitter as well. And I do have a personal website that's pretty new, a little bit amateurish, but that's just Dr. Jeffrey, Jeffrey, Degner at, drjeffreydegner.com. And I've got some papers posted there, other podcasts, links to some work that I've done in academic journals, and also publications with the Mises Institute. So you'll find my stuff there.
Awesome. Yeah, of course. And like I said in my opening, just my closing word to my audience is just, the as Mises said, economics is just human action, and
Yep.
so I just think that to act like, government policies that influence behavior don't change human behavior. I mean, it's almost just like it's an anti-tautology, right? To be like,
Mm.
I think changing the incentives of human behavior doesn't affect human behavior. I mean, it's just silly. And we as Christians need to care about politics, and we need to care about economics. And
Mhm.
it's not that I say, it's not that, it's not a matter of salvation. It's not a matter of
Right.
you're not a real Christian, but it's just that if we want to, uh, properly be salt and light, and we want to
Mhm.
properly point to the right way to organize a society in a way that reflects the values we believe in.
Yeah, reflects the kingdom.
We can't afford not to study these things and to understand them and talk about them. So, thank you again, Jeff, for coming on and helping us to talk about this. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'll be back here again next Monday. I have a new guest coming to the show next Monday. He's a fellow Christian YouTuber, not a libertarian, though he's open-minded to libertarianism. I've listened to some of his stuff. His name is Jonathan Rays. He has his own YouTube show where he focuses mostly on theology, but he had some coverage of the Charlie Kirk incident back when that happened that I thought was very valuable. And so I'm going to be having him on to have a conversation. That'll be again next week. That'll be the 24th. I believe that'll be at 9 p.m. as well. So make sure you are subscribed and hit that notification bell so you get all of our updates when you have upcoming live streams. And you can subscribe to me at Biblical Anarchy on X or at LCI Official. And that's all we have for you guys. Live it.